You've almost certainly heard of the Great Fire of London, a blaze that started in a bakery and went on to absolutely decimate a large part of the city in 1666. That fire was a biggie, not because it was particularly deadly, but because it changed the way London was built. By burning everything to the ground, it allowed city planners to take another shot at bringing some order to the chaos of London's narrow streets, and also to rebuild stuff with less flammable material. In many ways, the Great Fire of London was responsible for creating London as we know it today. And the same is true in many respects for the Great Fire of Edinburgh, although most people outside the city don't know there ever was a Great Fire here, or why it was such a big deal historically. The blaze began in the workshops of engraver James Kirkwood on the evening of the 15th of November 1824. A bottle of linseed oil overheated, which, by the way, is something that linseed oil just does spontaneously sometimes. Linseed oil-soaked rags can fully go on fire just from the heat generated by the oil evaporating, without requiring a single spark. In this case, the workshop was stacked with linseed oil, used to prepare printing ink at the time, and a whole bunch of paper. It went up like a bonfire. By 10 p.m, the first cries of fire were heard echoing around the streets below. A quick note on what Edinburgh looked like at this time. It already had some of the features that shape it today, handsome stone buildings like the Signet Library and the City Chambers, but many of the buildings in Edinburgh's Old Town were crowded tenements, built extremely close together, and built, if not entirely, then mostly, out of wood. As such, the fire spread quickly, leaping from tenement to tenement in the vicinity of Old Fishmarket Close. Residents grabbed what they could carry and fled. Those narrow wooden tenements were home to some of the city's poorest, and now, with the majority of their possessions on fire, they were even poorer. The printing facilities of the Scotsman newspaper were just across the road from the fire, but writers from the paper were initially unimpressed. Fires weren't all that uncommon, and according to their estimation, very ordinary exertions would be sufficient to subdue this one. Unfortunately, even very ordinary exertions weren't forthcoming. Up until very recently, there had been no dedicated fire service in the city, and the few engines that Edinburgh had were either managed by the police or by various insurance companies. One James Braidwood, the son of a cabinet maker, had been given the job of forming a fire brigade in Edinburgh. The trouble was, he was just 24 years old and had been given the job only 2 months prior. He barely started recruiting potential firefighters. They'd had almost no time to train, and when they pulled up to the Great Fire of Edinburgh, the whole enterprise was so new they weren't even sure where to get water, or who they were supposed to be taking instructions from. As the fire raged, everyone from local councillors to random gentlemen who happened to be nearby took it on themselves to try and tell the extremely stressed out firefighters what to do. Eventually, this fire more or less burned itself out, rather than waiting for the city's nascent fire brigade to get its act together. Unfortunately, embers were carried on the breeze and promptly started another fire on the steeple of the Tron Kirk just down the road. Descriptions of this second fire make it sound pretty apocalyptic. The steeple was mostly wood, so it burned well, melting the lead flashing that held the tiles in place and sending rivers of burning molten lead raining down on the streets below. While all this was happening, another fire, also the result of drifting embers, began around Parliament Square and blazed its way down towards Cowgate. The whole thing was just so unreasonable that many people decided it had to be a punishment from God and resorted to prayer. In the end, it was indeed an act of God that brought the fire under control. A deluge of rain on the 17th of November finally damped down the flames, leaving behind a scene of total devastation. The fire had consumed around 400 homes and multiple businesses, leaving thousands homeless and 13 people, including 2 firefighters, dead. A side note, Most of these people seem to have died when damaged tenements partially collapsed or while trying to retrieve possessions from burning buildings. One oft-repeated story has it that a lot of people died in the vaults during the Great Fire of Edinburgh after literally walling themselves inside one of the underground rooms in the hope that they'd be safe there since everything was made from stone. Of course, as the story has it, they weren't safe. Instead, as the fire swept through the area, they baked alive in an oven of their own making. Gruesome stuff. Or at least it would be, if it was true. However, there's not a single mention of this awful incident in any of the papers from the time. It seems to be a bit of fanciful invention, as if the vaults weren't scary enough already. Many of the buildings that had been burned by the fire had to be pulled down. The steeple of the Tron Kirk was rebuilt, and the maze of wooden tenements was replaced with several larger stone ones. St Giles Cathedral, which caught a bit of a scorching in the fire, was resurfaced to look as good as new just a few years later. Within a decade, most of the damage caused by the fire had been repaired, and the old town was bustling once again. But it wasn't entirely business as usual. Some things had changed. James Braidwood's baptism of fire had only made him more determined to build a lean, mean firefighting machine. His men were cleared of any blame for the chaotic response, and it was decided that in the future city councillors would keep their noses out if there was a fire and let the professionals decide what to do. The brigade were given new equipment and more training, and Braidwood went on to absolutely revolutionise firefighting tactics. Rather than just piling in and chucking water at it, he advocated for a more organised, tactical approach. This included principles such as investigating incidents of fire and educating the public on how to avoid setting stuff on fire, principles which are still applied today. When Braidwood published a book detailing his methods in 1830, they were taken up by newly formed fire brigades all over the country. There's now a statue of him in the city centre, not far from where the blaze of 1824 began. The Old Town is only a small part of the city of Edinburgh, and while the Great Fire did change how it looks and how it's organised, it wasn't as transformative as the Great Fire of London. But it did have a massive effect on firefighting, not just in the city, but around the whole country. In fact, it's pretty much the last fire in the history of Edinburgh to be so devastating. Valuable lessons were learned, and all it took was for half of the city centre to be reduced to ashes.